William Wallace is 7 feet tall.
Yes, I've heard. Kills men by the hundreds. And if he were here, he'd consume the English with fireballs from his eyes and bolts of lightning from his arse. I am William Wallace. And I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men. And free men you are. What will you do without freedom? Will you fight? Fight against that? No! We will run! And we will live. Aye. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Boy, that's a tearjerker.
Yeah.
It is. It really is. I heard it last night, and I was like dropping tears. Maybe right now I am. I'm not a Mel Gibson fan per se, but that is a great scene.
It is a great scene, and it's a great film as a film.
It is really a great movie.
There are, bits of it obviously which are Hollywood romanticized.
Right.
I don't think William Wallace ever had any affairs with any princesses.
A little bit of embellishment here and there.
That's poetic license, man.
but it's not. It's not bad compared to most historical films. It's actually pretty accurate historically. It's not bad at all.
Right. Spartacus was pretty accurate.
Spartacus, Spartacus happened.
Yeah, it happened. Okay. All right, this is Randy Credico live on the fly. Now we're morphing into the second half of our show today, and we're here. You're here because you're fighting for what Wallace fought for then, but in a legal way, I suppose, for Scottish independence.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go the other way.
I can't see you putting on a tin hat and a pair of boots and, bagpipes maybe.
I think I'd look
leading the charge.
Very fetching. I don't think I could lift Wallace's broadsword, but we're...
There's a big movement going on, right?
Yeah, there is. Most recent opinion polls have shown a small majority in favour of Scottish independence now. And it's 12 years since we had a referendum.
Right.
That was
a way back. Yesterday.
Yeah, there are 700,000 new voters. It's only a small nation.
Right.
There's 700,000 new voters, mostly young people who didn't have a chance to vote in that because they were too young. There's 500,000 people who did vote in that who died, and who were incidentally... and obviously, unfortunately, people die at a young age sometimes, but most people who die are older. And the only generation, the only demographic which had a majority for staying in the United Kingdom was the over 55s. Every other demographic voted for independence. And if you look at the 16 to 30-year-old demographic, you get figures of between 75 and 80% in favour of independence. So independence is inevitable. The world's got to accommodate to it.
We have two people waiting from they logged in early, and I should have made it clear that we were going to do this the second half. You know what I mean? Two friends of yours, people who are involved in this movement, this struggle. I don't know if they were around when Queen Elizabeth made some very nasty remarks about the Scots that wanted independence, but why don't you introduce these patient, dedicated to Scottish independence individuals to us, Craig?
Yeah, I will certainly, and I'm sorry they were told to log in too early, but they've had the great advantage of listening to us talk for an hour.
And they got to hear William Wallace.
Yeah, precisely. We have Sara Salyers from Liberation Scotland. Sarah's an inspirational figure in the independence movement who's reinvigorated it in many ways at a time when the official leader of the independence movement, because pro-independence forces have won every election in Scotland for the last 20 years, pretty well. But the establishment independent supporters, if you like, many of us feel they're rather more interested in collecting their salaries from the British state for being MPs or members of the Scottish Parliament than they are in really actually doing anything about independence. So we are, I and our guests, we're, if you like, the radical wing of the...
Are they the radical wing?
They are the radical wing. We are the radical wing of it. Nobody would be on your show if they weren't a radical wing.
I never get any conservatives on. Chuck Slatkin is the only conservative I get on.
And
I'm kidding.
So we have Sara, who's an inspirational...
Sara, what's the last?
Salyers.
Oh, Salyers.
Yep.
Okay.
And we have Alf Baird, Professor Alf Baird, I should say, who is extremely knowledgeable on the economic consequences of independence and also on the history of Scotland. But both Sara and Alf are extremely knowledgeable on the history of Scotland and the fact that Scotland is a colony, which is important because that's why I'm here, because I'm trying to persuade the United Nations to treat Scotland as a colony. And when you say Ireland was a colony, nobody argues. Go down the street and you say to anyone, particularly any Irishman, Ireland was a colony. And people just take that
of Ireland.
as
We're not talking
granted.
about Northern Ireland.
But you say to people, Scotland is a colony, and they look at you in amazement, because it's not an argument they've ever heard before. Even if they've watched Braveheart, they should realise. But they... Anyway, so I thought we'll develop on that.
Right. So what's the difference? So you have former British colonies like Australia and Canada. They're not on parity with the way the Scots are treated in the UK, right?
No, Scotland has a land border with England.
Right,
wasn't
I know
reached
that, right.
overseas, and Scotland has had representation in the English Parliament.
Right.
But that doesn't make you not a colony. The French colonies all had representation in the French Parliament, or most of them did.
Right.
They were still colonies. Having troops fighting for the British Empire doesn't make you not a colony. Every colony had troops conscripted by the British Army, every single one. India was conquered by Indian troops almost entirely. There are very few British troops involved in the conquest of India. They were mercenaries, taken on by the East India Company. Scotland is an integral part of the UK, but so was Ireland. Ireland also had people in the British Parliament. Ireland also had troops in the British Army. It didn't stop it being a colony. So these rather facile points which people try to make, to illustrate Scotland isn't a colony, really don't stand up. And the most important point in all of this, I guess, if you're a Scot, is that what Scotland has suffered and continues to suffer massive financial exploitation.
Are they here with you right now? I mean, are the professor and Sara, are they in the U.S. or are they in the U.K.?
No, they're in the U.K.
Or Scotland. I hate to say U.K.
They're in Scotland. They've dispatched me, and very, very kindly.
How's he doing, Sara? How's Craig doing?
Wonderfully.
Yeah. So, huh?
He's an absolute credit to Scotland.
Tell Alfred to unmute. You're muted, Alfred.
Hello, okay. I can hear you okay.
Okay, now we can hear you. All right. So we were just, your representative here, Craig Murray, I know he's been a long time fervent proponent of breaking off, unlike George Galloway, Scotland from the UK, which would be Northern Ireland and Wales, right? Right? Can you hear me?
Sorry, who was that directed at there?
Well, we'll go with you, Professor.
Right, well, Scotland's condition is obscure, as many colonial territories are. Their condition is obscured, but it's obscured on purpose. So we have moved quite a long way from classical colonialism to modern colonialism, and some people say that colonialism continued where slavery left off. But essentially, colonialism is largely about economic exploitation, and it's done through external political control. And it may also involve settler occupation and population displacement. So we have to remember here that Scotland has lost some 4 million of its people over the last 3 centuries since the since the so-called Treaty of Union.
Right.
So we have one of the largest out-migrations in Europe. And that was no accident. And as Craig mentioned, many Scottish military people ended up working for the British military forces, just as the Irish Army did, and the Indian Army, and the Kenyan Army, and others. So that was no accident either. But essentially, economic exploitation is the principal objective. But we have to also remember that colonialism is based on psychology. And we have what's called, also in this respect, the colonial mindset. So people do develop a colonial mindset, which, as I say, tends to obscure the reality. So it might not be so easily understood to people that Scotland is colonised as Ireland was, as Kenya, India, and other places. And so many places nowadays are being colonised and subject to colonialism, as we can see in the Middle East as well. It's all about land expropriation. It's about control of resources. And it's basically, we can go back to what we call colonialism really is driven by a sick civilization, as it were, a civilization that thinks it can and should and deserves to dominate other peoples and other communities. And that's what we have still in Scotland. We have a culture and a civilization that seeks domination rather than an equal partnership. So that's the condition we're in. And that's why we have more than half the population now seek liberation, which is the only remedy for colonialism.
Right. Well, Sara, the Scotland has its own parliament. It has its own legal system, and I don't know what kind of control that the feds. I guess they would be the feds out of the UK, tantamount to the feds here, and treating you like a state, but a colonial state. How does that work? Is there really? Where do you where's the imbrication line here?
Okay, well, you have to understand that what you're calling, the Scottish Parliament is they call it a devolved Parliament, and that's fair enough, but it is actually just the administrative arm, the executive of Westminster in Scotland. It was to give a little bit more agency to Scots in their own affairs, that most of the important areas of government are reserved to Westminster. And it was constituted under the Scotland Act, which puts power, sovereignty in the hands of Westminster. And I would say rides a coach and horses, in fact, the Scotland Act, right through the Treaty of Union. But what we now know is that the treaty that was supposed to create a new state, a partnership that created what people think of as the United Kingdom, in fact, as with so many other colonies and so many other English-British treaties, was discarded right away. It never came into effect. And that is something that's been hiding in plain sight for a long time. What actually happened was that Scotland was made into a dependency of the English crown, the English state. Scotland was extinguished as a state, while England simply continued under another name. So when you talk about the United Kingdom, or you talk about Britain, or you talk about the English state, you're talking about one and the same thing.
Right.
So we don't, when you talk about, this is federal, no, there's no similarity here between...
Well, I knew that. I just wanted my listeners to know that.
Well, hopefully now they do. So it's really not the same at all. I know that we know the British state really tries very hard to peddle the myth that, this is a union. Union never actually happened.
Right.
That Scotland is a partner. It absolutely isn't. You need a partnership agreement, and we didn't have one. And that the Parliament is a sign of Scotland being given a say in its own affairs. But where it counts, Scotland has no say. We were told at the time of this ridiculous referendum, and I say ridiculous because it just broke all the rules in 2014, that if people in Scotland voted to leave the Union, and by the way, that's the wrong way around. Scotland is annexed; it is a colony, so it's the administering power, the English state, that needs to leave Scotland, and not the other way around. But we were told that if we voted no to independence, we would get to stay in the European Union. And if we voted for independence, we'd be dragged out of Europe And of course, 2 years later, 63% of Scots voted to remain in Europe, and Scotland was dragged out.
Are they in line, Scotland, in line with the European, the EU policies?
I'm not sure now. Back then, Scotland has always been a very internationalist country. I mean, from early medieval times, Scotland had terrific relationships with other countries. We were busy. We thought it was much better to trade and to have a flow of a good economic exchange going on with other countries rather than to be at war with them all the time. So by the time of the so-called Union in 1707, Scotland had, well, up until William III, William the Orange, and I say the Orange rather than of Orange, we'd had this fantastic trading industry, maritime trade, right across Europe that to this day Scots are welcome really around the world because of that. While England had bankrupted itself, making war and fighting for colonial possessions, Scotland, I think, took the far more sensible course and looked at what was going to be good and for our prosperity.
Right.
So we had a very different background, very different take on all of this, and so that was we had all that in place right up until this point, and then coming back to what Craig said, actually, although I've probably lost my thread here, that is the point at which Scotland became part of, or was subsumed into the English state, claiming to be this new state created by Scotland, which never happened, and then was accused of being a colonist, was accused of being part, hand in glove and getting on board with the whole imperial colonial adventure, and that has never been Scotland's background. That's never been the pattern for Scotland, and that has lasted, and that is why Scots voted to stay in the European Union. I'm not sure, given the behaviour of the European Union now, how many people would really.
Right. They'd be like Claire Daly, maybe, right?
Yeah. I think we're much more like that, and we are. People are looking very seriously at EFTA, and we do want to have good international relationships because we always have had. But I don't think we want to be part of the new fascist agenda.
Right. Well, we like to hear that word, calling them fascists. All right, that's 4 people. You haven't said it yet, Reggie. You haven't. All right, we're gonna play. I've listened to a lot of Scottish music over the last 24 hours. Believe me, and I've only played a few pieces, and one of them Craig gave me by Greg, who was Norwegian, but from the Grieg clan. Here's something, and maybe you, Professor, can tell me about this tune. We'll play a minute of it. All right. Is that? Cry for Scottish independence, Craig Murray? That song? Tell me the genesis of it.
Yeah, that's Scots Way, written by Robert Burns, I think.
Oh, really?
It's a traditional tune but it's said to be the address of Robert Bruce to the troops before the Battle of Bannockburn. It's not actually his address; it's an imaginary one. But yeah, it's a rousing song that reminds us of our battles past. I'd like to move on and come to Alf to talk about, because I think the point I want to get over is the fact that Scotland continues to be economically throttled by England. We always say we are the only country in the whole world that ever discovered a lot of oil and got poorer, and we did.
Venezuela.
But Scotland has more oil, always did have more oil than Norway, for example. And yet the people of Norway are massively rich, and Norway has a sovereign wealth fund in the trillions of dollars, whereas the people in Scotland, the ordinary people in Scotland, are amongst the poorest people in Europe. The average income of a working class person in Scotland is below the income of a working class person in Slovenia. We produce, not just in oil, in terms of renewable energy, for example, we produce far more energy than we consume in Scotland. It's all exported to England. We get nothing for it.
What?
And yet we pay literally the highest retail energy prices in the whole world, which is
Even California.
And I just give that. And I'm talking 2-3 times as much. I just introduce that just as a few thoughts to get into your head, and I'd like Professor Alf to give us a more developed, if you like.
Right. That was a good setup, Greg. That's why I wanted you here.
Yes, it's a very good point, Craig. As we know, that Scotland's GDP per capita is less than half some of our near European neighbours, Norway, Ireland, for example, and considerably less than Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, and so on. So we are, as you say, the poorest country in northwest Europe. Yet at the same time, we have enormous resources. We have enormous resources of oil and gas, renewable energy, agricultural, fisheries, and so on, aggregates, the biggest quarries in Europe. So we have enormous resources and wonderful tourist product as well, the most significant tourist destination in the UK after London. So Scotland has enormous resources. So we have to then try and understand why we have a colonial balance sheet. Why we have such a low GDP per capita. And so there's an enormous leakage of wealth and resources. And particularly over the last 40, 50 years, Scotland has been purchased, essentially. Its corporations have been sold and rationalised. Its industries have been decimated. Everything has been privatised. You mentioned various other industries that have been privatised, but the public utilities have all been sold. Everything is now owned by offshore equity funds, including North American equity funds, Australian equity funds. And really, the equity fund background seems to be very much an Anglo-Saxon kind of thing. And that's where we get a very different cultural value system coming into Scotland. Scotland's cultural values, as Sara knows as well, historically are very, very different from the rest of the UK, particularly England, which is very much an Anglo-Saxon culture, focusing on private ownership of land, private profit, the private individual, whereas Scotland's traditional values are the common good, common ownership, the community. And so this is all very, very different. We also have to remember that in colonialism, your trade is extracted by the mother country. So most of Scotland's trade is directed at England, largely oil and gas, energy, for example, agriculture, and so on. Our seaports are therefore not developed for international trade. We've had no investment really in major seaports for 50 years or more. And so we're sitting with very Victorian infrastructure. We don't trade with Europe as we should be, and with the rest of the world. All our trade is sucked out at cheap. So in a colonial situation, all your trade and resources are taken out cheap by the mother country, the colonial power, London in our case, and private equity funds, and everything coming in is sold expensive. So our energy costs are extremely high, our food costs are very high, we're not a competitive economy, our international trade is diminishing as we speak, and all our trade is really, we're made dependent on the colonial power. You made a dependency. So our trade is dependent on that country now. So therefore it's subject to severe shocks. When we have major recessions and everything, it's hardly an effect in the rest of the UK or England particularly. So the situation is pretty dire. And I've estimated that the loss of wealth, the loss of GDP is at least £100 billion a year to Scotland. Scotland would be about £100 billion a year richer if it had access to and control over its resources.
Wow. That's amazing. Just amazing. Craig, before we get back to the professor here and also to Sara, your work at the, you've been here for a week. I've seen you at the beginning and then yesterday. So you've been very busy all week. And I saw you at night last night. At the UN, what is the objective and what has the feedback been in what work you're doing at the UN, lobbying?
Yeah, I'll come on, but let me just add one thing to what Alf just said, just to explain, just at the end. He was saying that a minimum, and I think it's a very conservative estimate, of £100 billion of wealth is extracted out of Scotland.
Out? Who does it go to?
And England, basically, and to billionaires, London-based billionaires, ultimately. But I think that's a very conservative estimate. But I want people to realise you're talking of £100 billion a year of wealth being extracted from a country of 6 million people. This is from a tiny country is losing £100 billion a year. It's not like taking
smaller
100
than
billion.
Population-wise.
Yeah,
right?
It's not like taking £100 billion out of the United States. This is a very high proportion of our wealth, which is extracted away. At the United Nations, I'm here getting people to understand what we've been talking about. I've also, of course, because we're here and it's at the UN and people at UN are diplomats and are connected with international relations, I've also been explaining to them that Scotland has totally different values and a totally different view of foreign affairs than England, than the United Kingdom. And this morning, in fact, even our First Minister of the Scottish Parliament, who's one of these rather token nationalists, certainly not from the radical side, like your guest, even our First Minister of Scotland put out a statement unequivocally condemning Israel for the attack on Iran, for example, which is with no blame attached to Iran at all in the statement, which is a completely different line to the UK government line.
What did they put out? What did they put out? UK line.
Starmer made a waffly statement, but it supported Israel's right of self-defense, as though Israel had been attacked. Whereas Scotland saying something completely different. And what Sara was saying about Scottish values, and Alf was saying, that of internationalism and of communalism, where Scotland bluntly is a left-wing country.
That's what I felt when I was there visiting you in 2017 with your family, and then Hugh Kerr. Yeah. Right? Hugh Kerr. Is he part of this movement?
He is indeed.
Yes,
okay.
He's a great guy. Yes.
He was a very valued member of the movement. And so, Scotland would unequivocally be with, against the genocide in Gaza, for example. Scotland is culturally really very close to Ireland, to be honest. So the sort of thing you're hearing from Claire and Mick, and to a surprisingly large extent from the Irish government, is the sort of thing you would come from an independent Scotland. So there are benefits to the international community in weakening the UK, which is a rogue state. The UK is a rogue state which participates in illegal invasions and projects imperial power abroad. You would weaken it by taking Scotland out. You would take away 40% of its land mass. You would take away 70% of its waters. You would take.
So there's a big pushback by
You
them.
would take away all of its nuclear weapons, which are kept in Scotland, because we're expendable. So it would weaken the UK massively. That's a very attractive prospect to many members of the United Nations. You know, the UK is greatly disliked by the international community.
Right. Yeah. People seem to avoid their what's her name, the ambassador. I don't see when she gets done speaking. I mean, it's like no one gravitates in her direction.
No, she gave a reception last night. I went to 2 receptions last night. I met you at the Russian reception.
Don't tell anybody.
Before that, I went to.
I'm already red-baited.
It was an avatar. Wasn't actually Randy. But before that, I went to the British reception.
You got in?
I gate crashed. It's a wonderful bit. English culture, British culture, is very different and is very class-based. And if you have an accent like mine, and you wear a suit, you can get in anywhere.
They didn't say, "Where's your invitation?" Seriously?
No, absolutely not. I just said, "Good evening," and they stood aside. So I
Scarlet Pimpernel.
But at the British reception, there were hardly any ambassadors. There were junior staff had turned up. The ambassadors were invited, but the ambassadors had all gone to the Russian reception.
Right.
Someone
The
junior.
India, the guy from India was there. Everybody was there.
But doing this,
Algeria.
what I'm doing is I'm trying to network and get people used to the idea of Scottish independence. Now, what we want to do is we want to get Scotland listed for decolonisation by the UN. That's a difficult process involving a key committee and involving the General Assembly. But it's not impossible, but that's a difficult process. But also, ultimately, independence depends on recognition by the United Nations, whichever route you go. So getting people there used to the idea of Scottish independence, getting other diplomats to realise, getting the international community to realise that there are important active Scots actively working for Scottish independence, and it is going to happen. It's going to happen. Making it a reality to them rather than something they've just heard of distantly. That's what I'm doing.
At that one reception that I was at, I saw you speaking to a lot of ambassadors there. So I guess you talked about it, right? Your mission, or was it just how are you doing?
No, that's what I was. That's exactly what I was talking about, and they were. They were very supportive. I mean, I genuinely haven't met anyone here except for Americans and Germans. I'm talking diplomats who have been hostile. Even the French were amusedly neutral. I might put it, but the vast majority of diplomats, and I've met now diplomats from, I don't know, 30 or 40 nations, I would guess, are extremely welcoming of
Did you speak to the diplomat, ambassador from India?
No, I haven't seen him.
Well, I saw him last night, but everyone was shaking his hand.
Can we
I want to get back to Sara. Yeah. So he's in the UN, right? Here working diplomatically. You're on the ground, and I'm an activist at heart all of my life, so I dig what you do. And so is that what you're doing right now? You're on the streets, getting the word out?
We have, I'm the director of the campaign arm of Liberation Salvo, and we have about 8,000 members.
Wow.
In various hubs around Scotland. And so what we're doing is now we're getting ready for the next part of this. So it's we've strategized this fairly carefully. There are things that have to happen before Scotland can get its self-determination, and the decolonisation part is because the perfidious Albion English state that subsumed Scotland represented Scotland as a partner in the Union and an integral part of this new state of Great Britain, which actually is a legal fiction. We would require to negotiate any withdrawal from the that union, and we would not have been, anything we tried to do on our own would not be recognised by the international community. And as Craig says, that's that's all that independence is. So it's really pretty important people understand that we're not an integral part of a state. That's England. It never changed. It just carried on. It took a new name. And that we are not going to, if we have a democratic event whereby people in Scotland say, okay, we're taking our country back out from under the administering power, then we're not breaking up a state at all. We're simply ending the dominion of a foreign state over the nation of Scotland. And that's really important. It changes things legally, internationally. It changes what we're able to do, what we'll be recognized for. And so that's why that's so important. But in order for that to have any real effect, then at home we have to be ready to take hold of that and run with it and make it happen. And there are things that have to be in place.
Professor,
and that's what we're looking at next.
Professor, can you give me a precedent to this? What you're doing that happened elsewhere on the planet in the last 100 years or 200 years?
Not really. I'm not so sure there are that many examples like Scotland, although most colonies, if not all, were handed a worthless treaty. And Scots have been holding this pretty worthless treaty now for 300 years, which is a very, very long time. But to eventually discover that it's worthless, although we know that the Scottish people knew initially it was worthless when it was signed in 1707 through bribery and corruption, and the people who signed it had to run for their lives out of Edinburgh and to get their money and so on. So we were procured in that sense, and in post-colonial theory, that's what happens to a country. You are bought and sold in some way, and that was the poem written by Burns about Scotland as well. Bought and sold for English gold, such a parcel of rogues in a nation. So we have the poetry to tell us that. So we were not unusual in that sense. So I suppose in that regard, most countries and colonies were the same. They're sold out by the native elite, and the native elite assimilate into the culture of the colonizer. And that happened in India, Kenya, Ireland, Scotland, everywhere. So the colonizing modus operandi is always the same. But as I said earlier, it's based on psychology, and it becomes known in post-colonial theory as the colonial hoax. You're sold a hoax, that you're sold this hoax that there is a better culture, the culture of the colonizer, the language of the colonizer, the values of the colonizer are all superior to your own. So you discard your own values, your own language, your own identity, and people do discard their identity.
Wow. I wish I had you as a professor in my 2 years in college. And by the way, how did you get tenure? Or do you have tenure? Because I would think that some of those universities would say, we've got to get rid of this guy. He's talking too much truth to power.
Well, I was awarded a personal chair, so I'm still sitting on it. I can always be chucked out. But you have to remember, your institutions are also colonial. So what you're saying is perfectly correct. And many academics in Scotland, after the referendum in 2014, found that their careers were based on a Shugley peg, if you know what I mean. And because our institutions are also colonial in their nature, their values, their hierarchy, their hegemony. So all our institutions in that sense are colonial. So we have quite a repair job to do in Scotland. We have to, in liberation theory, transform the reality that we're faced with, which is a colonial society, colonial values, a colonial mindset. And in post-colonial theory, liberation is not just of the nation, it's also of the mind. So the people have to discard their colonial mindset, and this requires quite difficult treatment, but it's fundamentally important, because you could get independence, like certain African countries have got independence, but not fully independent afterwards. They're still tied to the Paris or London or wherever, or Washington, and commercially and culturally, as far as the hegemony and the hierarchy and the elites are concerned. And that's not what decolonization is about. So decolonization is a complete break with colonial society, which is, as going back to what Craig said earlier, colonialism is based, is the root of colonialism is fascism. That's where fascism comes from, according to Salyers and others who even studied at the time were in Europe during the Nazi invasions of many countries and the colonizations of many European countries. So we have this reality that colonialism was not just directed at black communities in Africa or in Asia as well. It was directed also at white communities, and therefore that's the reality we face. It's a difficult reality, but we also now have a very, very strong legal advice in Scotland that the Union is a fraud. It was never implemented. Scotland was subsumed, it was annexed, its territory exploited, its people discarded to the four corners of the earth. And there's so many Scots in North America, as you know. We all have relatives all over the world, but that's what's called banishment of the natives in post-colonial theory. And Scotland had the biggest banishment of natives next to Ireland in Europe.
You know, I got to tell you something. I've been there one time, and that's the city. Edinburgh is the most beautiful city I've been to. I always say that. Well, I love Moscow, and but that is such a pristine, clean city, and all the historical markers. Where was that place where you go? That park? I think it's like next to the cemetery. Next to the cemetery, Burns or Adam Smith are interred. Craig?
Well, off the Canongate, there's a wee botanic garden just the next close down. Yeah, and
Wow.
I that's why I do my thinking when I'm
Right. I got pictures of you doing your thinking there, and what's the name of that street that runs up and down?
That's the Canongate, which is part of the Royal Mile.
Wow, well, that is the mile. Yeah, it's great. And Sara or Professor, the history of I know you're a rich nation. But the rich history, particularly, who wants to talk about the Scottish Enlightenment, which blows away any other, Enlightenment at that time?
Well, could I say something about the coming Scottish Enlightenment?
Yes, please do. Can you tell us about the coming American Enlightenment? You think we'll have that?
Oh, I'd love to. But the American Declaration of Independence owed an awful lot to Scots. If you take a look at the Scottish Claim of Right Act 1689 and the list of grievances, and then compare that with the American Declaration of Independence, and you will see how powerfully the nascent nation of America was influenced by the Scots, who had been putting a constitution together for a very long time before they were interrupted by English annexation. And that's where the new Scottish Enlightenment, I believe, is going to come from. As we talk about progressive agendas and what will stand against the new fascism. This is it's a corporate oligarchic kind of fascism that we're looking at, and the new colonialism. And actually, what we did not know, I did not know until 4 or 5 years ago, because I didn't understand it. We don't do civics in Scotland, sadly. I didn't understand that every nation that has a government has a constitution, whether it's all gathered in one place or not. I didn't understand that the Scots constitution was still there, and I didn't understand how extraordinary this ancient constitution really is, because it places it unlike the English feudal system. Even if you don't have a monarch in Scotland, you still have a crown, and that crown's still in place. But the crown isn't the king or queen; it's the people. The people are the crown of Scotland, and they're sovereign. They're the absolute authority over their government, their courts, everything. The people are legally sovereign in Scotland. That translates into things like direct democracy, the right to recall, veto of a government, replacement of. In modern terms, that is the most progressive agenda you could possibly imagine. It also has a principle called the common good right at the heart of that constitution, which puts the rights of the people as the sole purpose of government, and as an absolutely inalienable condition of any government or power, that those rights are preserved and protected. If not, they can be removed.
Well, your constitution, probably had influence on our constitution, but we added some flaws to it. All right, there were a lot of flaws that were injected in our constitution. All right. But
if this is what we are not happy. We are not happy to say, okay, let's have the system we've got now, but it will be independent of Westminster. No, liberation has to mean full restoration. That's the Scottish Constitution, back in place, modernised, And I believe that is the new enlightenment, because I think that's the prescription for the ills of the world. And if Scotland can put that into place, I think many other countries will follow suit and put the power back in the hands of the people and make power absolutely accountable, and put a brake on this unfettered corporate greed and power that we're seeing. Because if the good of the people and the interests of the people, the rights of the people come before anything else.
All right, it sounds we're down to well said. We're down to our last 4.5 minutes. So I'm going to go to you, Professor, for a couple of minutes, and then Craig is going to give us some final words. What is your final thoughts here, Professor? And thank you for being on the show. You too, Sarah.
Yeah, it's very kind of you to have us. I think it's a very exciting time for Scotland. I think also the rest of the world will look on the decolonisation of Scotland as a massive opportunity, because remember that there's quite a lot of colonies still to be decolonised, and they're all UK territories, as it were. So Scotland, if it's added to that list, will be another one. But it will also mean that the people will realise that the UK is not as it seems. The UK is basically England rebranded, single English crown. King Charles is not, as we know in Scotland. He was never crowned with the crown of Scots, and never took the Scottish oath.
A dunce hat he was crowned with.
So we should remember also that we're looking for support from other states, and that includes the United States, I would say. And remember also that you have a president who is a very Scottish president in many ways. His mother, Mary MacLeod, was from Scotland, and Donald Trump regards himself as Scots. And on the rule of descendancy, parental descendancy, he is a Scotsman. So I think he should look at this case that we're making to the UN and support us. And that should be one of our priorities as well.
I wouldn't go to your turf accountant on that one, but plunge down too many pounds. All right, let's go. Craig, we got 3 minutes left for you. All right, give us a total summary. Don't go anywhere, folks, because I want you to hear our closing music. Go ahead. Craig.
Well, we've worked together, Randy, on Julian Assange's freedom and on various other issues for quite a lot of years, and I'm known around the world as someone who travels the world fighting for human rights, fighting for freedom. But I think for anybody, there's no cause that means more to them than the freedom of their own country. And my country's not free. My country's been under English occupation for hundreds of years and is relentlessly exploited. And I see people in my own country, which should be a very wealthy country, who can't afford to feed their children properly. I think people understand. I've not talked about this on your show before. I've always been talking about other things. But I think people will understand that for me and for others like me, this is fundamental to my being. This is the thing I wake up and live and breathe for. And also, we see the UK is helping the genocide in Gaza. The UK is providing aerial surveillance out of Cyprus to provide intelligence on targeting to the Israelis. As we speak today, there are Israeli military training in British bases in the UK. The UK provides diplomatic cover for them, all kinds of intelligence assistance. So, the UK is, unfortunately, it has to be said, a consistent force for evil in the world. And so if I can at the same time help free my own people and help break up and weaken the UK, that's a double whammy and a real blow for good.
The sun still shines in the British Empire then on that side of the world in Scotland, right? You would say.
Yeah, there still is a British Empire, and right. Scotland is a part of it.
Well, Sarah, if you have I got 1 minute for you, Sarah. Tell us how people can reach you, how they can get involved without breaking any FARA laws.
You can contact us via the Liberation website or Salvo's website, so liberation.scot, and you can send an email to secretariat@liberation.scot. We're always thrilled to hear from the diaspora, and I would just remind that some of your listeners, probably quite a few of them, that they're where they are today because of the way that they were cleared their ancestors were
Well, they're
killed.
mostly in prison, my listeners. So,
Well, I'm not going to lay that at the hands of the British state. The English state, however, there's an awful lot of Americans out there who are there purely because their ancestors were
right.
killed.
Listen, I know my neighbor, the Campbells, everyone it seems like in California where I grew up, they were all Scottish. Amazing. So, Professor, how do I get a scholarship to your college?
Sorry, what was that?
Never mind. No, how do I get a scholarship to your college? We got 30 seconds. Tell us how people can follow you, find you.
Well, I think the best place is liberation.scot is our website for the liberation movement, and salvo.scot. And all the news that we're about our progress is coming through from these websites.
All right. Well, I want to thank all three of you, and we're going to play. This is the Royal Scots Band, I believe, orchestra, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Royal Scots Dragon.
Yeah, dragoons. All right, dragoons. Who are they, Craig?
Well, they'd be a regiment of the British Army.
Oh, goodness. Do we have somebody else to play? But they do play the bagpipes well.
They do play the bagpipes.
They're like the Red Army Choir.
And it's a genuine, it may seem corny, it's a genuine old Scottish tune. And a very typical pipe tune, because it's at base very simple, but then you add grace notes as you repeat it. And actually, it's interesting because when you hear this song as a spiritual by African American female singers in particular, their form of singing relies on the addition of grace notes, of additional harmonizing notes that flirt up and down. And that's actually correct. That's the correct way to treat this kind of